This program is brought to you by thepodcastfactory.com.
Ben Settle, super practical.
I'm not telling people to have a mistress. I'm teaching you, learn the lesson from the people who have a mistress, because there's many business lessons that apply.
Pious.
There's a part in the book of Revelation where Jesus says, I want you either hot or cold. I'm spewing lukewarm churches out. And I think it's a good way to look at your list.
Romantic to his very core.
Once in a while, I'll give my girl a present, like a Snickers bar or something.
And totes tender.
If someone asks you to walk on eggshells, smash the eggshells and let the chips fall wherever they may.
Adored by feminists everywhere.
It takes a strong woman to admit when she's wrong.
Not a judgmental bone in his entire body.
I look at all the free information people give just on Facebook and I go, what a bunch of time hose.
Has a PhD in armchair philosophy.
In the land of dumbasses, the smartass is king.
You'll never meet a more sensitive guy.
If you really care about people, you shame the hell out of them. This is Ben Settle, the bensettle.com podcast. And this is the final series in the elBenbo's Mount Rushmore series of episodes where I talked about my four favorite, not just favorite, but the marketers and copywriters who've had the biggest impact on my business. These are the four. I mean, there's obviously many more than four, but these are the four. If I had to narrow it down, these guys have had by far the most impact. The first one was Matt Fury. The second was Gary Bencivenga. And the third was Ken McCarthy. And this fourth one, which I know many people who have followed me for a while can already guess, is Gary Halbert. The first three, I've actually, and here's something interesting, Jonathan, and this is where, unfortunately, my timing was not so good. So the first three people I talked about, Matt Fury, Gary Bencivenga, and Ken McCarthy, I have managed to get testimonials from them over the years, right? Which is like, you know, to me, that's means a lot. Like that, it goes beyond just, oh, you know, so-and-so from Arkansas says this. These are like to me, gold card, platinum card testimonials. Not just because they give my ads weight and all that, but just for my own ego, all right? But this one I will never be able to get, unfortunately, Jonathan. I know that there are some people in the coaching world, in the woo-woo world, who probably think they could arrange this for me. They're a seance or something. But I say we just let them rest in peace. Okay, so I don't need to get any emails from any people in the coaching industry saying, you know, all that. I got the idea from the Mount Rushmore, or the analogy at least, from the great Brian Kurtz, which I mentioned the last three episodes. That's sort of his way of saying who his most influential people were. And I shamelessly used his analogy for my own wicked ways here, which I'm doing. I've only been trying to reference the stuff that either I've observed or that they've given away or taught free somewhere. I'm trying not to give away like proprietary information. I think I've succeeded in that, Jonathan.
Pretty good.
And this one will be no different because I really want people to buy their stuff. I'm not doing this just to do it. I actually legitimately really want people to buy. Like, the world will be a better place if you guys all buy Matt Fury's stuff. If you go on his Facebook group, his new Facebook group for email marketers, and buy his course and his newsletter, you're going to be better at this. Better emails are going to be written and more money is going to be made and everyone's going to be happier. If you buy Gary Bencivenga's big $5,000 course, your ads are going to get infinitely better. You're going to make more sales and money. You're going to do more good things. It's going to be better for you. It's going to be better for your customers because you're going to be marketing to them in a way that they like, that's respectful to them. You're going to be helping the rest of the industry out as a result. So we don't all have this like stain because of the bad people. Same with Ken McCarthy. If you get his stuff and you learn positioning the way he teaches, and you learn how to write copy the way he does, and you learn how to use the internet the way he taught, he was the original founding father of the internet marketing as we know it. You learn his stuff, you're going to be better at all this stuff. You're going to make more sales. I'm going to be happier because hopefully you're going to buy more stuff from me. But even if you don't, you're still going to be doing much better, and everyone's happier. And it's no different than Gary Halbert, even though he's not alive to enjoy this episode, nor would he probably listen to it even if he was. You know, he's got a legacy and his sons are carrying that legacy on. And I say buy his stuff from them. And I'm going to give you a couple things that I think everyone should buy from him, from his site. So now I got all that preliminary stuff out of the way. What are some things that I've learned from Gary Halbert, this fourth member of my Mount Rushmore? First of all, he was like him and Dan Kennedy were like the first people I really learned from. And I remember just seeing Gary Halbert's newsletters and seeing just how you could push the envelope of personality, right? And this is back when things were a lot more politically correct. So, and he was doing things that would be the equivalent of today, like someone being real, like a talk radio show host or something. And he was extremely good at just letting his personality flow. Now, I have heard this, and I can't verify it, but I do believe it, that, and maybe he said this, I've taught it somewhere, that he didn't write his newsletter necessarily. I mean, he wrote his newsletter for many reasons, but part of it was for him to find his writing personality. So take that for however you want, but it sure does make a case for writing daily emails. I mean, the more daily emails you write, the more you're going to find your voice, as people like to call it. I've never had a trouble finding my voice, but I guess this is a thing. I don't know. This is a thing, Jonathan. People have trouble finding their voice. Fine. Start writing daily emails. He basically wrote a monthly newsletter. You can write daily emails and do it even faster. His writing was some of the smoothest and most flowing I've ever seen, right? I mean, when you see a Gary Halbert ad, you know it's a Gary Halbert ad because it's so smooth and it flows so well. And he knows how to just get into your psychology. What looks like effortless ease. I mean, he just gets right in there. I was reading this interview AWI did with David Deutsch many years ago. The A-list copywriter, David Deutsch, one of the best copywriters on the planet. And I remember he was talking about Gary Halbert, and he goes, Gary Halbert was just one of those guys where he just could talk to you for 5 minutes and he just knows what to say to you to sell you, which I think he just knew how to read markets and he knew exactly what to say. This is something I've been trying very, very hard to get good at over the years. And, I don't write these really long sales letters anymore because I like to think that I've learned from Gary Halbert that you don't necessarily have to say too much. I mean, you want to say what you have to say, but a lot of it is just finding out what they want to hear or what they need to hear to buy. And it sounds like a very simple thing, but a lot of people get caught up in benefits and claims and, this and that and all the jargon and, you got to have risk reversal. And they start using all this jargon when really, what do they want? And okay, how can I convince them I can give it to them in a way that at a good price and for what they want? Really, I mean, this is what I've observed from reading Gary Halbert stuff. A lot of it comes from his smooth writing. Like it's very conversational and he can just tell you what you want to hear, what you need to hear to make the sale and doing it in a way that's very non-threatening. And, I don't know how many ads you've written or have read from him, Jonathan, but I would read his ads just for pleasure. In fact, people always ask, well, whose ads should I write out by hand? Right? Because I think that's good advice. It's advice Gary Halbert used to teach. He says it helps it gives you like these neurological connections. So your body knows what it's like to actually write world-class copy by handwriting it out. And I think that's a very smart way to do it. And it's not just copywriting. Novelists have done the same thing. The guy who wrote the book Roots apparently did that. Like wrote a book out by hand, and then he traveled in like the belly of a boat, like a rusted, crappy boat. So he knew what it was like to cross the ocean and all that, and under those kind of conditions. And he was able to write Roots. Well, I think Joe Vitale said he did the same thing. He used to write out certain ads from like classic novels, or not ads. He'd write out classic novels by hand and all that. It's very powerful. It gives you a neurological connection. Well, that's something Gary Halbert used to tell people to do, and that's something I took to heart. And so I used to write out Gary Halbert ads. Is it because he's my favorite copywriter? Yeah, probably, but also because I actually enjoyed reading his ads. It was fun. Like he made reading an ad fun. And I believe it's because if you just pick up his way of writing, that's how it goes. Another thing he did probably better than anybody, and, I mean, he didn't teach it a lot from what I can tell, but he sure did it really well, was storytelling. I mean, he was the king of storytelling ads. I mean, you read any one of his ads, there's always a fascinating story attached to it. And once you read a fascinating story like that, it's hard to put it down just because it's a story. One of my favorites, Jonathan, and I know this is going to be kind of crude for people, but one of my favorites was this ad he wrote for a vagina tightening cream. Did you ever read that?
No, I did not.
Oh, that's great. You can find it on thegaryhalbertletter.com. It's in one of his back issues. And last I checked, it was still up there. And he wrote this ad and he made it fascinating. Like I'm a guy, right? I shouldn't even care about this. Okay, for the most part. And but he made it so you have to read every word of this ad. And he talked about, there's this thing that happened in Asia many, many centuries ago where women found out how to keep themselves tight and everything so their husbands wouldn't want to cheat on them. And you're like reading this thing. This is the most fascinating story I think I've ever read in a sales letter, And he kept it very, for the subject matter that it was, he kept it actually very classy. It wasn't like pornographic or anything. And he was just a master at telling stories like that. And there was a lesson in that. And then in that issue, which again, you can get free on thegaryhalbertletter.com, there was a lesson in that I never forgot. He goes, It took me like 3 hours to write that ad, but it took me 6 weeks or 6 months to actually know what to say. So that's a huge lesson. Like knowing what to say is more important than how you say it. And so be it. Another thing he taught, well, actually, he didn't teach this, Jonathan. He did not teach this. In fact, I don't think he ever, at least not that I ever saw. I think there are many products he has I still don't have. But from what I've seen, and I've read almost every issue, and I'm still working on some of these issues. And I'm going to show everyone where to get all of his back issues in print copy if you want. I have not seen him teach this. And I remember hearing Dan Kennedy talk about he didn't really get taught this by Gary Halbert. It's something he sort of just observed. And when I heard Dan Kennedy say this, a lot of things clicked for me, and I started implementing this even more. Even though I was already doing it, I now consciously do this. And that is, he was the master of self-aggrandizement. It's funny, right? But he was not in the copywriting business or the marketing business. He was in the self-aggrandizement business. He was in the business of being Gary Halbert. And this is where most people, especially in our industry, Jonathan, are way too meek and they're way too scared to do this. But I'm telling you, the more you do it, the better things will be. The problem is, once you do it, you're going to start making yourself a target for trolls. The more I do this, the more trolls I get.
Wait, I need some clarification here.
Yes.
Because I follow all your rules to the letter. That's why I need some clarification. But self-aggrandizement, isn't there an email players rule where if you got to say it, you ain't it? So how do those two play together?
Well, that was the next thing I was going to get into. That's the next thing. Did you ever notice that Gary could get away with that? He could say it and you'd believe it, right? He was one of the few people that when he did that, you didn't really question it. But you get a bunch of Gary Halbert wannabes today who do it, and they just sound like, they're just bragging. Well, I'm the best at this. What the difference is Gary had the track record to prove it. He could back it up. So if you can back it up, you can get away with it. I really believe that. If you can back it up, if Gary Bencivenga went out and said, I'm the best salesman in the copywriter in the world, we're not going to disagree with that. But if Ben Settle does it, you're going to disagree with it because I'm not the best. I'm not even close to the best. And so you have to be able to back it up. And he could back it up when he used to say, I'm the world's greatest copywriter. I mean, he could back it up. There's a case to be made that Gary Halbert was the world's greatest copywriter. And so for him, you can do it. And I think that you got to find that. Remember when I said you were the podcast king, Jonathan? Remember that?
Ah, yes. Very special day. I wrote it in my diary.
The better you get at this, the more comfortable you'll be able to say, I am the greatest podcast producer in the world. Now, it may sound a little funny talking about podcasting, but the point is, if you can back it up, you can do it. That's my whole point. Most people cannot back up their self-aggrandizement, so they shouldn't do it.
Hot air then. I got you.
All right. So moving on to the next thing I learned from Gary Halbert is bullet writing. Whatever I learned about bullets, and people can judge my bullets on their merit, and I've had many good things said about my bullets from people that I highly respect, including Ken McCarthy and some other people that their names escape me, but their names most people would recognize. TJ Rollletter, that was the guy. I don't know if you know him, but he's an old school direct mail guy.
Yeah.
Like he once gave me a testimony about my bullets. It was great. Like hearing it from these guys is like, that's everything. And so I learned it from Gary Halbert, just mindlessly copying his bullets out by hand, studying his bullets, reading all of his newsletter issues about bullet writing. But in one of those issues, he talks about this. If you want to get good at this, you got to be willing to pay the price. And he says, here's how you do it. And he goes, you go find all these bullets and you write them out by hand. It's like 500 bullets. Well, and you put one to a note card and you just do that. And he goes, most people will never do that. Well, Jonathan, I did it. I wrote all of his bullets out.
Kidding.
All the bullets he listed, which were a lot of John Carlton bullets and stuff. I did it one to a note card. And I got to say, it was one of the best copywriting educations I ever got, hands down. And, there's a lot that can be taught about bullet writing, but really you can observe and study his stuff and you'll get great at it. Here's something to think about. So if you go to his site, thegaryhalbertletter.com, I don't know which one it's called. It's one of his stock letter. He used to talk about the stock market because he used to sell a stock picking system. And there's one of those sales letters, which is just one of my favorite all-time sales letters to study. I've used it. I've been influenced by it for many different products and many different niches. And it's selling a stock system. And it basically starts out with him giving like what his recent picks are. And then he goes into explaining his stock system, like in detail, except he leaves out like one or two things that you need to implement his system. And you look at this, it was actually a newsletter issue, but it was a brilliant sales letter. Like I really wanted to buy that stupid product, but unfortunately I didn't have the $8,500 at the time to do it. And I believe he said you can only pay by check and all that. So I couldn't have gotten it, but I wouldn't have had any money to invest anyway, because this was back in 2003 when I read it. But I got to say, it is, if you can find it on there, and again, it's one of the stock market ones, and it starts out with, here are my picks, and then it talks about what his system does and how it works. And then he starts talking about, his credentials as a copywriter, because he actually ties it in. He goes, but there's some details you need to learn to do what I just told you. First, you need to know how to find out what news is coming out the next day. And you have to be able to read headlines, to know what a headline is, how it's going to affect a stock. And that's where I shine. I'm the best copywriter in the world. And then he goes into like all of the reasons he's the best copywriter in the world. And then the PS, he brilliantly takes it away. It's just a great sales letter. I highly recommend everyone read. He also has an issue on thegaryhalbertletter.com called The Dark Side of Success. At least it used to be up there. I don't know if it is anymore, but if you get your hands on that, I read it very early in my career. I'm glad I did, because I really believe it kept me from making a lot of stupid mistakes. Like, for example, I don't publicly count money. Unfortunately, once in a while, I'll say something like, well, I just finally passed the 7 figures, but I don't get real detailed. I don't tell you what I've netted. I don't tell you like about any of my possessions or lack of possessions. I don't tell you about any of that stuff. I don't show you my car and all this and all this crap. Nobody would really want to see my car anyway, but I don't show these things because of what I read in The Dark Side of Success. You can actually attract some of the worst people in the world to you. And not only that, you could set yourself up for being a target later on by the government and other people and entities that are not friendly to you. And I believe everyone should read the Dark Side of Success newsletter. It's very, very, very important. Finally, his Boron Letters, which I think is one of the greatest books ever written for marketers and copywriters and business people. And the thing that I got out of that, Jonathan, that really, this changed a lot for me. I'm really glad I learned this so early on, actually, because there's people I know have been in business 5, 10 years who still haven't grasped this, believe it or not. And that is, knowing how to pick a market is far more important than how to pick a product. Like, everybody puts all their time and money and thought and energy into the product, but really picking the market is far more important. Because what happens is most people have a product looking for a solution, or they have a solution looking for a problem. But what you want to do is find problems that are looking for solutions. Much better that way. And if you don't know what I'm talking about while you're listening to this, I recommend rewinding what I just said and listening to it several more times. But even more importantly, going to Amazon and getting the Boron Letters, which is like $9 now. I had to pay $97 for it, if that makes you feel any better. And it may even be free on the GaryHalbertLetter.com digitally. I don't know, but I highly recommend it. And then finally, you can get all of his back issues, or at least most of them, at thegaryhalbertletter.com. His sons are now selling those back issues. It comes in 2 giant binders. It's fascinating reading. It's a lot of it's direct mail. So not all of it is applicable to the internet if you're just doing internet, but a lot of it can also be adapted to the internet, which I've been doing ever since getting them. And I highly recommend those. And to sum it all up, Jonathan, the 4th head on my elBenbo's Mount Rushmore is the great Gary Halbert, along with the great Matt Fury, the great Gary Bensaving, and the great Ken McCarthy. These are the 4 people who I highly recommend studying from, getting everything you can from them and learning all you can from them. If you like what I teach and what I do, these are the people who influence me, and I cannot recommend enough. So next week, we're going to get off the elBenbo's Mount Rushmore, Jonathan, and we're going to let the tourists just kind of hang out there for a while, and we're going to move on to... I'm not going to say exactly what it is. I'm going to tease a little bit. There's a certain publication that everybody, I believe it's print publication, that I believe everyone should be reading as much as I say, studying the Mount Rushmore people. I think you should be reading this, or at least reading it somewhat regularly, for not only emails and sales letters, but other just infotainment and how to use your personality and all these other, and just crisp writing and everything. And it ain't the National Enquirer, in case that's what people are just automatically thinking. So much better than National Enquirer. And that'll be next week.
Oh, man, I can't wait. So that is another BenSettle.com podcast. We'll be back in your earbuds next week.
You've been listening to the BenSettle.com podcast. To download yourself a free issue of Ben's prestigious $97 per month email players newsletter, which is going to show you 24 ways to write emails people eagerly read, click, and buy from, head on over to www.bensettle.com. Well, off you go. You know it makes sense.
This is the podcastfactory.com.